Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to our panel, wherever you are in this world, in the different time zones. I'm Beatrix Busse, and I'm very happy to host this panel, which is part of the ICAME 41 digital conference, which was supposed to be said at Heidelberg University. Our topic for this panel is At the Tipping Point, to be public or not to be public in Corpus Linguistics. Now, welcome dear ICAMers, and as I said, welcome all other people interested in the topic of this panel. Now, we will discuss today the issue of transfer of knowledge and collaboration opportunities between academia and linguistics, as well as also corporations and the public in general. Hence, what we'd like to do today is to discuss the societal impact of corpus linguistics or linguistics and the impact on society, and the other way around. How does society impact on corpus linguistics and what we are doing? Now, we're not starting from scratch here, of course. There's lots of work that has been done with regard to language and communication in businesses, education, equity and communication, outreach guides for science festivals and museums in linguistics. And some of us have collaborated with cultural institutions, with schools, politicians, and companies. But it's not just because of this current crisis we are experiencing, but also because we experiencing also that the future seems to change its directions. And I think that linguistics can no longer be marginalized just as one discipline within university. I feel a sense of urgency. We are at the tipping point, hence the title. The heat is on, and we have to use the momentum to perhaps change things, to push ourselves further, to leave our comfort zone and radically rethink what we do in linguistics and in corpus linguistics. Think out of our boxes. Things are changing dramatically in data science and artificial intelligence, digital humanities, language as such, because we're living in a rapidly changing, mobile, global, digital, multicultural, and also diverse world. The role of communication and language cannot be underestimated, especially not, and this is not only true because in times of social distancing, but also before. If we go back in the past, there's one line from Shakespeare's The Tempest: "You taught me language, and my profit is I know how to curse." A lot of data, and one of my guests is going to talk about that, I think. A lot of data are linguistic. The role of language is there in all social spheres, and sometimes we're judged by our language usage. What are we? Who are we as data scientists? And what is the impact on how we look at corpus linguistics? Now, in addition, there's outside pressure, because we have to build impact into our research. We also have to accept that we are lifelong learners, all of us, and not just, but also and especially the next generation. So as I said, there's lots of trust in science at the moment, and is expectations also of what science is. So with this panel, my main aim, or our main aim, is also again to think about what we have to do. What is it that we can do as linguists and as corpus linguists? Perhaps it will be and has to be a co-creational effort of working together to solve or to find solutions to the grand societal challenges. Will be an interdisciplinary endeavor. We will find new methods, and perhaps even working with lower hierarchies than we have used before and worked with before. So the potential is going in two ways: from linguistics to society, and from society, corporates, journalism, politics, and so on, law, to linguistics. So sympathy here is not enough, but empathy is what counts. We have to try really hard. And as experts of language, as data scientists, there is quite a lot we can do for this world. And perhaps we want to become also very concrete here. And therefore, it is my great honor to introduce our three panelists, my three panelists here, three lovely and wonderful women who have agreed to participate in this panel. I'm going to start with Michaela Mahlberg. Michaela Mahlberg is professor of Corpus Linguistics at the University of Birmingham, and she's also the director of the Birmingham Center for Corpus Research. She has done quite a number of projects with and for society, which I'm sure she's going to tell us about in a minute. Then there is Celeste Rodriguez Louro, a social linguist and a senior lecturer and an Australian Research Council Fellow in linguistics at the University of Western Australia in Perth. At the same time, very much keen on and involved in working with and for society in her research. She will be telling us about her projects as well. And finally, Ina Schlie, a senior executive and supervisory board member for digital transformation and finance, also the co-founder of Next Exit Future, which is going to help us tomorrow with the design thinking workshop. She's an economist, and for more than 2 decades, she's worked at SAP in various functions, for example, as Senior Vice President, Digital Government. And in addition, she's also teaching at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, as well as a lecturer. So ladies, welcome. It's great to have you. Thank you for agreeing to be part of this panel and discussing the two ways of language, linguistics, and society, and what linguistics probably has to do. Now, we agreed, I've given these ladies a question to start off with so that they can pitch some of their opinions on this topic. And I'm going to start with Ina Schlie. Ina, now if you think of, or had to think of the ways that language and communication are important for your field of work, and if you also had to think about, with regard to this relation, what really matters to you in your work, what would you stress?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Beatrix, and also a warm welcome from my side to the audience. I've dialed in from Heidelberg, the town where I studied, and I'm really happy to contribute to this discussion as an economist. So I'm the lonely one here, so to say, but I feel that it's very important that we have this exchange of expertise of the various fields we are working in. So communication and language have impacted me all my career, and to go quickly to the corporate world, where we use, for example, natural language processing to improve the communication with our customers. For example, using chatbots or automated service ticketing system, just to give one example. But we also can provide real-time sentiment analysis to politicians to react to trends investigated in the social media channels. And here we more or less get the connect to the society, which I feel is very important. A digital transformation where industry sectors think more in networks and platforms rather than in silos. We now have unimagined sizes of data, which makes application of AI meaningful. And most importantly, you tackled this already, Beatrix, we need to think about the next generation of people in science and industry who have a complete different idea of working, driven by purpose and sustainability. And we have to tackle all these changes. And I feel, I can think about 3 methodologies who might help us to get along with this with this fast change and with the complexity of this change. One is interdisciplinary rethinking, lifelong learning, you mentioned this already, and open research. So I feel that we cannot resolve today's challenges in silos. In all subjects, including linguistics, we should hardly engage the next generation to look outside the box. And it's high time to use new ways of training the next generation. Therefore, education and training needs to involve. And I feel digitization is not to put existing content into a digital cover. If you have visited the LearnTech in Karlsruhe, I felt, no, this is not the real truth, e-learning. Yeah, we really need to think about how we can inspire our students with modern methodologies. And I feel one of it is interdisciplinary thinking. And in my role as a lecturer in Munich, I led my students to be creative within these design thinking workshops. And it's not that I want to stay them in a silo. I invite people from startups, from corporates, from politics, and also from other areas of science to join the workshops so that they can resolve more or less an overarching topic together. And this was so much or greatly appreciated by the students, because it's for them, you know, in Germany we have a very traditional way to teach. It was very fascinating for them to learn this way and also to teach the older people. So, and tomorrow, you mentioned this already, we will have a design thinking format, and I'm really happy that so many people joined to more or less have the same experience. I also want to mention lifelong learning, because our knowledge from today will be outdated the day after tomorrow. And lifelong learning means that we need to have the ability to permanently reflect and a high degree of emotional competence, and most importantly, the strong willingness to share knowledge, because we have to make our knowledge transparent in order to get faster and to cope with the speed of the change. We should also use reverse mentoring. As I said, we have to learn from younger people, and this is a methodology which is applied in companies, yeah, where you can either have discussions with younger employees, and we should also think about working more hierarchy-free. Yeah, with you know, typically people ask for organizational charts and so on, and this time is over with, I feel. The last topic I want to tackle quickly is open research. Interdisciplinarity requires open research, not only across discipline, but within discipline. It has never been easier to bring together researchers' knowledge and sources to tackle complex research challenges. We need to share, as I mentioned already, those results. And there's also already some great examples. Let's think about Zooniverse. This is a science portal where researchers from various fields are working on challenges together. Yeah, and these topics could range from biology, language, and literature. Yeah, we may also discuss later whether Plan S, open access to all research results related to EU funded projects, could be a right approach. And to close, in my opinion, it's never black and white. It's always a combination of the best.
Yeah. Thank you, Ina, for that. I just got a message saying that you know, the introduction I gave wasn't really couldn't really be heard because of an echo, but that doesn't matter because many of the points you know, I raised, you've taken up. So that's very good. You talked about also, in a way, I could feel this sense of urgency you were feeling as well, that we have to do something now, and this is about interdisciplinarity, and also, yeah, how you know, could see the interplay between language and society, the way we have to work together, the way we have to find new methods, and also collect all the data we've got with new tools and methodologies. So, yeah, I think that's really at the heart now, that we have to do something to build impact into our research. Michaela and Celeste, so I'm going to move to the linguist, so to see, you know, what your experience is with that. In what ways have you addressed, as both linguists from different, well, areas or disciplines of linguistics, address society? What matters most to you at the moment? Perhaps Michaela, you would like to begin.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for me, for the way I view corpus linguistics, it's really this interconnection between language and society that is crucial. And as corpus linguists, we just work with an assumption that we take for granted, but we don't, I feel, don't spell it out enough or spell it out enough for people who are not corpus linguists. So when I introduce myself and speak to people with whom I might be working on projects, something I find very important to explain is that language is basically everywhere. We use language to communicate, to act, to interact, to make things happen. You know, if you just look at the current crisis, how important language was in all of this, in the way that you had to influence people to change their behavior in certain ways. There's only so much that you can do by giving people rules to behave. You also need to communicate them, and you need to get buy-in so that it actually works. Now, if you look at what we consider corpus data is basically a lot of language produced by a lot of people. And when you see a corpus like this, then you're right in the middle of dealing with question in social science and humanities, because then you've got real life there in front of you that you can analyze. And that's for any kind of discipline. Language is absolutely crucial to understand the research question, to speak in a team, to communicate the findings. So whether that is astrophysics, engineering, or medicine, you need the language to work together and then do something with what you've found out. So theoretically, as corpus linguists, we should be working in an interdisciplinary context just by default, theoretically. But practically, there's quite a big challenge. And that challenge, I feel, is the communication. So not just the communication that we actually analyze, but the way we speak to others. So how do we speak to non-corpus linguists? How are we able to explain that what we do matters? How are we able to communicate how we've got the tools to find answers to certain questions? And that is something that has preoccupied me quite a bit. And I think, Beatrix, your question, what matters to me most, probably the emphasis of this has changed a bit over the years. So I've spent a lot of time looking at this interdisciplinary relationship between language and literature, culture, that kind of relationship. But what I learned there is that you really need to have your users who use your findings with you along the way. So for instance, that web application Click that we developed is one where we constantly speak to the people who might use it to say, does this make sense to you? Can you actually see what we want to be doing with this? Because sometimes as a corpus linguist, you can get so excited about a new way of searching or displaying something, and then you show it to people who are not corpus linguists and then just look at you and say, so what is that about? If you go the other way and ask people, what would you like to find out if you had the opportunity, then you also might construct what you deliver in a different way. And I think the emphasis in my work has also changed a little bit just by necessity. So, you know, recently I had to do a management job at university, and then, you know, everyone at some point has to do things. And then you find a way of, you know, making connections. And I think because I had to look a lot at research that wasn't in my field, I'm now somehow at this stage where I look at research problems and then try to translate this into, so how is that question a linguistic question? Or what is the angle of this that is actually to do with language? Or how can we use this wonderful data set that you might have collected in veterinary sciences, or these questionnaires that you've got from medicine, or these reports that you do in astrophysics? How can we use this and then think about what's the language question behind this, and how can we help with what you're doing anyway? So I think that for me is the crucial thing. How do we communicate? How do we speak? How do we get out of this inward-looking corpus linguistics, we amongst ourselves, which is very nice. And I love conferences like this because you see all your friends, you talk to the people you've known forever. But we also need to be able to not just preach to the choir, but speak to others who might be more difficult to convince. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. Celeste, now it's your turn. Where's your relationship to society from your area of expertise, linguistic expertise? What matters most to you?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to say hello from the future. It's almost tomorrow here in Australia, and I'm very honored to be a part of this panel. I wanted to also acknowledge the Nyungar people who are the traditional custodians of these lands. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I am here today because I strongly believe that linguistics can change the world. As a field, we are in possession of invaluable knowledge. The question is, are we doing enough? Are we putting our expertise to good use outside academia? Some linguists have been doing this for a long time. Think Deborah Cameron, John Rickford, William Lebov. In fact, 2 days ago, Lebov himself offered an online lecture titled Justice as a Linguistic Matter. There are at least a couple of really relevant papers in Language and Linguistics Compass. The Linguistic Society of America has a whole outreach guide called Taking Linguistics to the Public, and the list goes on. But today I wanted to tell you about my own experience. I wanted to tell you about a linguistics project that has made it possible to make a difference. So my own tipping point came in the second half of 2019 when I had the chance to pitch an idea to the Department of Education in my state. The idea was to teach linguistics content to educators so as to raise awareness of linguistic diversity in schools. And the need to do this came very strongly from hearing my collaborator, Glenys Collard, who is herself an Aboriginal woman, talk about how Indigenous Australians who speak Aboriginal English may think of their English as broken, may think of their English as rubbish, and the consequences that this can actually have for their lives. We were particularly keen to help teachers understand those students who speak languages or varieties other than standard Australian English. How do they grapple with a new linguistic system at school? And we were really excited about this because failing to pick up the national variety of whatever country you're in can significantly set people back. So we asked, how can we make sure that students thrive? And at that point, we thought that one of the biggest challenges really was teachers not fully understanding how language works. So we designed a one-day workshop. We called it Understanding Language. We discussed definitions of language and why these definitions are always political. We asked questions about the role of language in people's self-esteem, or students' self-esteem in this case. The teachers were blown away. How come they had never heard about any of this? So linguistic knowledge that may seem like second nature to us linguists can actually change the world, or at least someone's world. It can mean the difference between valuing linguistic diversity and maybe being afraid of it simply because we may not understand it properly. So that's me. And that's what's kind of moving me to try and use linguistics in the service of society.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your first views on how the relationship can be defined, can be actually realized. Thank you very much for that. Ina, if you listen to those linguists, as specialists in a way, what do you think? I mean, what's your view on this? You especially focused on the interdisciplinary aspect. And if you think of your examples, your experience with those projects, would you say, yes, this is something I can use, this is something, that would be interesting for corporates, this is something you have experienced already?
So I feel that the linguists have a huge power, as it was mentioned, because they could be so supportive. I mean, not only to society, they could help improving social media. They can improve the corporate world in a sense that we need to have more knowledge about language and how to use knowledge, how to communicate. I have the feeling that there are lots of starting points where companies do a great job, when they're training about intercultural differences, you name it. But and this is where we come back to interdisciplinarity. I feel when we're talking about, how to combine digitization with a new style of learning, this is also a linguistic perspective, because we also need to understand how to communicate. And therefore, it's more or less to bring everything together in the discussion. And given the very process-oriented Germans, for example, I think we could learn a lot from the linguists in a sense of how to use our language in a better way, to more or less make the people feel more comfortable in the corporate world, for example.
And would you say, I mean, what is it you need? I mean, in terms of what would you give to us in a way? I in a way, I don't like this you us, but I mean, we have disciplinary knowledge, all of us, in a way, and it's getting together now, I think, to really solve the pressing issues this society has to face. But sometimes you might think, it's the linguists again, or whatever. What is it you would want from us, or what is it you would need that would help you in this sense?
So first of all, we cannot get sick of the linguists because they are not visible that much to us. I think this is exactly what Celeste mentioned. You need to increase your visibility and the importance and the impact you might have on our society. And this is decisive, because otherwise, how can corporates improve on that topic? Sure, the IT companies hire lots of linguists, but their knowledge is used, because when we also talk about the application of AI, we need linguists more or less to explain to us how we can investigate social media on certain topics. Sure, we also need the data scientists, but we also need to come from a content perspective.
Thank you. Michaela, you already started saying, also talked about the visibility and so on. So from your projects and your experience with, societal spheres and different domains, what's your view on that? What we should do?
Yeah, I wanted to actually connect to something that Ina just said about the starting points and what we need. And I think there's a certain degree just of very simple and plain exposure. So this working together. And one example I just wanted to bring there is because for me, this was something that I had never experienced before, and it was a complete eye-opener. So with a team of people from our Center for Corpus Linguistics, we did something together with an external company where we got invited to one of their hackathons. So the idea there was, you had 24 hours and there were then lots of challenges. So the company told us there are all these challenges, and then people got numbers and they could find a table and think about which challenge they would try to answer in 24 hours. And I must admit, I probably went to bed after 22 or so because I'm too old for this. But there was something in this trying to really work it out there and then with a group of people you had never worked with. So we were our team, we knew each other, but then there were lots of other people, and these people necessarily hadn't worked together in the company. And then you had to try and find out, okay, here's this problem. What have we all got that we can bring to the table? And then at the end of this, after these 24 hours, you had to come up with a 3-minute pitch to explain what your suggestion was and how you would then move on from there. And I think what was a really important experience was from a university context where things can take a very long time, from the initial idea through to all the applications and all the committees that need to look at and all the peer reviews that you get, and months later you know whether you can start. The span of time was so short and the energy was so creative, and I think that is something where we can do a lot more. So having much more opportunities like this where we can be creative together. So this joint creative experience and this exposure to different worldviews. And then you don't have the time and say to people, let me explain to you what corpus linguistics is. Here are the 5 main papers that introduce the topic. By that time, the day is over. You need to be there and say, look, what I can bring to the table is this. This is what I can quickly do. This is how we can think about it. And then just go with the flow and try to bring it together in 3 minutes. Anyway, that's the point I wanted to make here.
Thank you for that, Celeste. If you connect this, what we've just discussed, with the question, and we discussed this before about how to train the next generation, and what is our responsibility if we think in terms of there's real trust now in science, but then of course the world is changing so rapidly. We seem to be lifelong learners. This morning we had the discussion about, yes, program is important, no it's not. Some of us even can't do it, so what is it we have to do? Where are the future skills? Where is this real disciplinary knowledge? What is disciplinary knowledge? So what is it we have to do for the next generation, and who has to do it? Is it this joint kind of effort we see here? So I think we need people like Ina. We do, so because sometimes they show us the mirror and say, listen, don't forget your user group, and don't forget that your students will have to, and this is always said, might work in a job they haven't been trained in. That's probably normal. So what do you think?
Well, I think firstly, it's a great question, because I think that as academics, we are also educators, and there is a responsibility that comes with that you obviously want to offer the best you can, and to be honest as well, that we can't keep teaching or keep doing the things that we were doing maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, because it's just not the same world we're living in. So I was sort of picking up on a few things that were mentioned just now. I think Ina mentioned something about learning from a younger generation and sort of also reversing the hierarchies. And while I'm not suggesting that we sort of throw away all of our knowledge and our disciplinary sort of expertise, that would be silly. I think it's really interesting to kind of change the mindset a bit, at least for outreach and impact, to try and be really creative and let sort of the juices flow both ways, so that people, so that we, you're very enriched as an academic when you do outreach, because it is extremely fascinating to realize that what you've been studying for the last 20, 30 years, however long, some people obviously have been at it longer than this, can have a real impact. And so if you're surrounded by your students, then I guess you could invite them over to whatever outreach activity you're working on, for them to kind of see it in the flesh, how it is that you're bringing it out there into the real world. So there are specific things you could do and teach. The other thing I was thinking is that I feel as though the intellectual pursuit, the process that goes into creating scholarly publications and the like, is probably a very different kind of process. It's very introspective and potentially very picky in the kind of details of how you put the piece of puzzle together. Whereas when you do outreach, and this obviously you would have to teach to your students or the next generation, it's more about the big picture. So it's very much about problem solving. So last year I attended an open day here at my university, and one of the young people addressing other young people was saying it's no longer about abstract theories. It's about problem solving. what's the problem? How can we solve it? And I think that is extremely important. I don't think we need to throw away, once again, our expertise, but I feel as though we need to kind of identify the problems and then try to find ways that our expertise can help. And I agree that linguistics is extremely useful and necessary. It's just that we need to make it known to people that this is what we do and this is what we know.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the introduction, I try to make the point that perhaps, saying we have to work in an interdisciplinary way is, of course, a huge challenge because it takes time. It's very time consuming. Then, you have to see, when have you reached the point that you speak a common language and so on. In addition to that, I think one other point which is coming up now during this crisis is that there's a huge need for showing empathy, for being very generous with regard to this is interesting what others do. And these are jobs, other jobs, professions, disciplines, and so on that count. Now, there's one question from the chat now where it said that or ask, really, I think Kelly asks, is to ask about the challenges with regard to digitization and emotional intelligence. Both are highly needed, but how can we expect to improve individuals' emotional intelligence when we are behind screens, phones, tablets, etc.? So how do we do this now, especially in this time, and what role does language play here? Is anybody, Ina, what do you think? This is, of course, another big skill, I think. At least I read about this for corporate companies, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I would say what we're doing today requires another form of emotional competence. Yeah, because meeting virtually, and there were also some research in Japan with elderly people, whether a robot would actually be of help to communicate to those people. And within the study, it was found out that a robot could more or less, not completely, fill in for a human being, but that the elder people really enjoyed it, and to a certain extent could somehow make the people happy. Yeah, so we should consider this. I know that in Central Europe we somehow not that far yet, yeah, but like in Japan, I feel they're quite advanced with regard to this type of robotics. And as we said, it's a combination, yeah. And I feel, the emotional competence which is necessary always needs to be combined with how I characterize leadership, yeah. Because the most important topic or challenge in all fields of expertise is to not bring everybody on the same page, because this is not the overarching goal, but to get everybody engaged. Yeah, and this is so important, and you can only tackle this if you make employees, students part of your change. And I did some research on that. Professor Stange in Germany did a great study on the digitization relevance for university, and he found out that only 7% of the German universities get the students engaged on more or less improving on digital education. Yeah, but I feel, and I also asked this question, but the students are somehow your customer, yeah, when we translate it from the corporate world to science. So how can you not engage your students when you discuss new teaching methodology with regard to soft skills, but also with regard to computational science, which will be relevant in all faculties, in all study paths.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, computational science especially. We have to talk about artificial intelligence as such, big data and so on. And there's also another question from the chat, because that also relates to, of course, the methods we are going to employ, how we're going to deal with, quantitative and qualitative data. That question has been around for some time. but are we data scientists? How do we deal with artificial intelligence? There's one question from the chat. I'd like to hear their perspective on methods. The linguistic turn in digitized society is clearly about the proliferation of linguistic data as the basis for crucial social actions at many dimensions, and the general acknowledgement about the status of language and communication. But is it also about the machine learning, including deep learning models that are essentially alinguistic? Well, are they? Not informed by theories of syntax, lexis, etc. These machine learning approaches sometimes appear quite different from theory-driven linguistics. So perhaps that's a very special question, but perhaps we can, slowly approach this. How do we deal with the new developments in machine learning and so on? How are we data scientists now, or is that more clever to say, yes, that's what we are? What do you think, Michaela? What do you think? How would we position ourselves there?
Yeah, that goes to the heart of one of the key challenges that I sometimes see for our field, because what do you say that you are? I sometimes have a bit of an identity crisis when I speak to people, because sometimes it is helpful to explain that you're really, where you explain corpus linguistics as the data science of language studies. In other contexts, it's really important to emphasize that it isn't all automatic or just entirely computational and quantitative, because you need the other elements as well. But this is also part of how our world has changed. So this isn't just a challenge for us as corpus linguists, that is generally the world is now different in this digital age. Communication is different, the way we work is different, the tools that we have, and it is, I think it's more about adjusting to this. So this is where my point is about the outward looking corpus linguistics. So corpus linguistics was a particular type of field, let's say 20 years ago, because of how we collected corpora, what kind of software we had. But now the world is a different place, and we can't just behave in the same way like we did 20 years ago. We need to interact with this new world, and maybe we also need a bit more flexibility as to how we explain what we do. The bottom line is the term corpus linguistics in itself is okay for us when we know what it is about, but as soon as you leave the university and speak to other people out there, it's not the most attractive pitch to introduce what you do.
And would you say that, because machine learning and deep learning, and that's the question I think is essentially alinguistic, how do we deal with that? It's not about syntax and so on. So how do we tackle this? We're using big data, some of us, I think, well, relatively speaking.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's to a large extent complementary, and I spent hours and days and months with a colleague in computer science discussing exactly this in the sense of how do we bring this together. It's not one or the other, and maybe because what you can do with the automatic algorithms is you can find patterns, and we also want to find patterns, only there is different types of patterns, and if you bring them all together you get quite a good picture. And if you look at it complementary, but it's not black or white, just one or the other, but that is difficult to then do across disciplines, because you need to know a bit about what the others do to be able to bring it together.
Celeste, what's your work? What's your view on this? The artificial intelligence, huge amounts of data, especially in relation to your research.
Because I'm a variationist social linguist, and I am working with minority language communities where the things we're discussing are completely different, obviously, because we're talking about, much smaller speech communities and, in some instances, matters of life and death. So there are other issues, I guess, at stake. But I think with artificial intelligence, of course, there's the mechanical aspects that you're describing, which I think a corpus linguist we're very well equipped to interact with. And I agree with Michaela that there's nothing wrong extending, pushing the envelope a little bit so that the field can be relevant a little bit outside of the very core, which doesn't need to be abandoned in any way, but why not do a little bit more than what we generally have been doing? But I think also there will be the interactional aspect of artificial intelligence, whereby humans will be interacting with these things. And in that sense, I think our linguistic expertise will be quite relevant as well, because you'll be looking at pragmatics, you'll be looking at things like discourse markers and things like that as well. So I think I am generally a very open-minded sort of, person and academic. And so I think the field would be much better off if it were to expand and try out new things. I don't feel like stay put and trying to do things the way we've always done things will help in any way. But, that's just my point of view.
That would lead very nicely to a comment Lawrence Anthony made, quoting Chris Manning, who says that perhaps there's not enough linguistic theory yet that has entered, this discussion and the AI discussion, and perhaps that would be good. I like to come back to one.
Can I just say what?
Yeah.
Can I say one thing about this? Because connecting back to these conversations I had with colleagues in computer science, I spent, just because I thought it was interesting, quite a bit of time doing a bit of a literature review on what kind of linguistic knowledge people use in certain areas of AI, just to see what the key references are. And this is, it feels, as if is quite a time lag between what is considered as the mainstream of linguistics when it is applied in other areas. And that goes back to this interaction, where we need to be much faster and much more on the ball to actually speak to one another, so that the best of each discipline can come together, and you don't need to wait till something has filtered through and people then realize where you are, but you need to be there together a lot more. Anyway, that was the point I wanted to make.
Now, I think that perhaps links up to another question I wanted to ask that relates to methodology. Of course, we have our core methodologies. Methodologies are in the making as well. Now, if you say the best of everything, Ina said it can't be black and white and we have to work together. Would you say that, for example, what I would call the co-creational effort, so doing things together, is already a methodology in that sense that would be good for all of us, improving our research, really pushing it to the edge, really, doing new things. And I have to ask this question because there are 3 women now. Is there a gender aspect to that? Who would like to answer that? Ina. Or to make a statement? I don't think there's an answer to it, but
yeah, I feel, we can use AI, as a methodology also to tackle gender bias, which is important. But I wanted to highlight or build on what has discussed before. I feel AI is technology, which is not, which supports us with research. So research first, or if we go back to the corporate world, business model first, and then we see what we want to achieve, and then how we can use the various technology. And this is an important point. And if we want to take the example of gender bias, that we also need to admit that the technology is only as good as it is programmed in the first instance. and it's also only as good as the data set we're using. And if we now discussing the possibility we have today to investigate unstructured and structured data for our research, or also in the corporate world, and combine this with automized generated questionnaires to get even more insight. Yeah, we need to bear in mind that there is a gender bias, because 75% of all data in the internet is created by male, just to give one example. Yeah, only 70% of the data in Wikipedia is related to women. Yeah, so I'm sure that you as linguists have a huge challenge here. Yeah, because if we are evaluating all that, and if, as we know, AI is programming itself at a certain point in time, we know that there is an unconscious AI bias, so to say, and we have to tackle this, because otherwise we don't make the world better. And here we have to install filters and so on. Yeah, and I feel also that it's, if we talk then about the assistants like Alexa and Siri, yeah, they all have female names, but only to mention this on top. Yeah, and I don't have a solution. I mean, I'm a digitization expert, but I'm not an AI expert yet. And I feel that we definitely need the linguists here also to improve everything what is done with AI, also in relation to gender, to culture, to demographic differences, and so on.
Celeste, what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking that the pandemic has made it so much worse for women. So I don't know that I remain extremely optimistic about gender imbalances. I don't know much. I didn't actually know about artificial intelligence and the issues that Ina was just discussing now. If anything, my hope is that a more open, sort of the more open pathways that come with, ways to share research and reach out, and the hierarchies sort of dissolving or changing, and more women coming into the picture, and women supporting women and that kind of thing. I hope it will change things around, and also not just for men and women, but all the other people who sit in between, who are not and do not want to, do not wish to align with this, so that we're just more inclusive as a field. But I think it'll be a slow process, because the inequalities are vast, unfortunately.
Yeah. Michaela, there's one comment. Yes, we have to pay. Tanya Saley, yes, we have to think about whose language we are analyzing. Perhaps you would want to comment on that with relation to, well, the topics we've just discussed.
Can I, before I comment on this, put something else in on the gender bias, and then I come back to that topic. I also found it interesting to see at the keynote this morning, if you just look at our own field, if Lawrence had these nice slides which were really good about what kind of tools do we have and what things do people use, and you could also see a bit of a pattern in the sense of who looks after tools or who creates tools and who are then the users of them. And maybe we also could do a bit of self-reflection in the field. And then what kind of whose language we're analyzing, that is a very broad question. So can I come there with an example to see whether that would hit it? Because I'm thinking a lot about how we can take concepts from corpus linguistics and try to map them onto things in the real world. And if you look at whose language we're analyzing, a concept that I find quite interesting is the influencer on social media. So, how does influencing on social media work, and how is that fundamentally a corpusistic question? And how does a certain variety of language get more attention than other varieties? Or also, whose language are we analyzing? For me, when I look at the work on fiction that I do, there's something around the canon, and what is the canon? And we've recently started looking at African American writing to see what place that has in the canon when you look at it from a corpus linguistic point of view. So is that what the question was about, or is it more about learners, native speakers, different language varieties within a language, or different languages overall?
Yeah, perhaps both, I guess. I mean, these issues are all very important. There's another one which Ina has just tackled, the danger of racial gender bias in AI systems, So how do we tackle this if an algorithm has learned to apply these biases, what's going to happen? I just read, for example, that some algorithms go astray because our shopping habits have changed due to the pandemic. I mean, so what's going on in this world? And also, I think with regard to what we talked before, emotional intelligence, empathy, and so on, how is empathy linguistically realized and by whom? So I guess that's also perhaps for corporates and for the economic sphere probably a huge issue as well, and will become more important, isn't it? What do you think?
Yeah, I feel for me the most important topic is the education of the young people. This is also for the corporate world, where the requirements get so different in comparison to a couple of years ago. Yeah. So for me, the question is really how, and I mean, I'm not saying that universities are more or less producing a workforce or something like that. No? This would not be the right saying, but at least, the universities should consider what is going on in the corporate world. I feel this is very important. And here we once again have to connect the dots. Yeah, and because we want lots of scientists and to get a home also in the corporate world, because I definitely want or stay in the universities. And here I really feel that not only in schools but also at the university we need to have a different education on all levels and all study paths, because we need to consider, and we have to be fast. I mean, we're discussing a lot how we can include or how we can evolve digital education. Yeah, and here I really feel that we at least need to offer computational science, including AI, to all students of all fields, because at least all these students should have the option to deal with that. And it's not, as I said earlier, it's not a black or white. Yeah, it's a combination, but we need to provide these opportunities. And then still, students, it's their decision whether they want to go the traditional way or whether they want to go a different way. I feel this is important. And we shouldn't be, I mean, sometimes I feel we're so one-minded because we are so keen on finding out the right way. And as I said earlier, we need to combine everything in what we perceive as good methodologies. Yeah, and we also, this question was raised by the chat earlier, and we're also talking about interdisciplinarity, as we discussed earlier. We discussed about empathy, about soft skills, and this is also not considered in most of the study paths, I feel. So we have to learn so much things when we are leaving university to somehow survive in the corporate world. It's like for me, it was a shock somehow. Yeah, and now from these learnings, I try to build the bridges to my lecture role in Munich. Yeah, but we really have to change the way we are teaching. Yeah, we should keep traditional methods, but we need different room concepts. Yeah, we need hierarchy-free learning. Yeah, we need interactive classes. Yeah, where students learn to fight the professors. Yeah, and to really challenge them in a certain way. This is how I would proceed in the future. Really take the best of all we have and combine it and give the opportunities to the students.
So perhaps, since it's 6 o'clock here in Germany already, just one final round of one question, because, you know, it said, we've heard this morning, yes, programming is very important. Yes, an introduction to artificial intelligence and so on. Celeste, I'm a lover also of words and phrases which only occur once, I have to say, you know, in certain corpora. I worked on Shakespeare and I love the words he founded, but which only usually occur once, at least in Shakespeare, you know, they weren't taken up by the speech communities. Then, you know, something like unsex, for example, in Macbeth, come unsex me, you know, things like that. So how do you feel if you hear this? I mean, don't we need with artificial intelligence and so on, what about the ethical aspect of all of this? What about, you know, the qualitative, the small data, if you like? I mean, if I think of your research areas and how you mean you have to work in such a sophisticated, very sensitive way with, yeah, you know, your informants and so on. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I think that's the heart of the whole enterprise that you and it's a no-brainer for me, because as social linguists, you obviously have the speaker or the speakers, you know, the speech community at the core. I think it's, again, it'd be really lovely to have more dialogue going between the disciplines, and it started a few years ago already at one of the new ways of analyzing variation conferences in Toronto, where corpus linguists were kind of interacting with variationist social linguists and kind of finding points of you know, similar things that they were doing. I think the speaker and the speech community have a lot to tell us. You know, that's where our humanity and our problems and our culture and who we are sort of rests. And then obviously you can kind of extrapolate and quantify and model all you want, but where are those data coming from, and who were the people, what were the circumstances, what were the historical, cultural, social circumstances in which these data were produced, and there's a lot of ethics that goes into it as well. Probably ran out of time to talk about ethics. This is a whole new different panel, but I think it's good to remain aware of the ethical constraints and read up on it, and, you know, sort of educate oneself.
Yeah, thank you for that. So one final statement by each of you. So what do you think in terms of, well, if you have the current context in mind, the pandemic, and then, you know, what we've just discussed, if you had to, let's say, okay, this is my final statement, this is most dear to me, so to come full circle with regard to my initial question, what matters most, what is most, what is an issue for you at the moment, what is something you really would like to fight for? Perhaps you can just, with a few words, summarize that. Who would like to begin? Michaela, can I ask you first?
Yeah. So no, I think for me, it's really this general open-mindedness and outward-looking approach. I mean, especially in the time that we find ourselves in, it is really going outside the comfort zone, trying to not do what we've always done, and then dealing with problems in a way that we slightly adjust the known approach so that we can just about deal with the problem. But I think if this pandemic has shown us anything, it's you really need to look at, you know, what's the big thing? How do you deal with the big thing? And if you need to throw absolutely everything in the air to deal with this, then yes, let's go and do this. And I think from a corpus linguistics point of view, again, I feel we are very good as a community. So I really, you know, I go to a lot of conferences everywhere, and I really like my corpus linguistic community. But I think we also need to find ways to deliberately, consciously, creatively interact with others in ways that we haven't considered before. And that for me is the most pressing and most urgent at this point in time.
Celeste. What's your final
word? For me, the thing that really motivates me to do what I'm doing at the moment, and I feel like I'm in my zone, is to put linguistics to the service of society. Mm-hmm. And I struggle a lot with a kind of inequality that was already in place in the world, and that has only become so much worse because of the pandemic. So that moves me. I'm very passionate about cross-cultural research projects, two-way collaborations, Indigenous leadership, sustainable practice. All these kinds of things really make me very passionate for what I do and make me want to teach the next generation. So I would say fighting inequality, although it can sound a bit cheesy and a bit like a big thing to do, I do believe that linguistics can be used to service society, and I'm not alone. There's a very big precedence for that before. So that's it.
Thank you, Ina.
Yeah, it's difficult, very difficult to find some final words because we had such a broad discussion. Mm-hmm. But I feel that we need to speed up. Yeah, if we consider how slow we are in discussing the transformation of our education. I mean, here I can take Germany as an example. Yeah, and if we compare this to Asia or the US, we already have a huge disadvantage. Yeah, this is what I feel. Yeah, especially with regard to digitization, but also with regard to interdisciplinarity. So the question really is, how can we really speed up? And I feel that we are somehow paralyzed, as I said in the beginning, because maybe the change is too fast, too complex. I don't know. I don't know why we are not moving. Take Germany as an example. There's a DAISY digitization index, and this reflects that Germany has one of the highest capabilities in the world to transform on all these topics due to the technology background, the engineers and so on. But we are the poorest in executing on these capabilities. And this really concerns me a lot, because we are not moving, and every year we are more or less falling down the ranks. And here I'm really afraid that we are stuck in discussions, and here we discussed ethics. I mean, in Germany, we had an advisory board on ethics before we were discussing how to accelerate on the technology itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I feel that it's valid. It's the most important thing at the end to set the background in relation to ethics, but it's maybe not the first thing. Maybe we should really also think how we can accelerate on founding AI faculties. But this is not the only thing. As we said, this will have an impact on all subjects, including linguistics. And linguistics plays such an important role because it will help us to implement and execute on all these strategies in the right manner.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think I won't add anything to this. This is a very nice final statement. And one of the reasons why we decided to have the design thinking workshop tomorrow is really to think about ideas, what we can actually do now, and not, as you were saying, not just discussing things. So do in terms of where is the transition, where is this two-way or perhaps multi-way process we as linguists and the linguists and and society and so on. So what is it we can do? What is it we can build on? What we've already done, but I also feel this sense of urgency. I keep referring to this song, "The Heat Is On." Yes, actually, that's why I wanted to have this panel, and that's why we also wanted to discuss the next generation. There's something we have to do for the future generation, for our PhD candidates, students, whatever. We have to be really fast there as well. I fully agree. So, ladies, thank you very much for this. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing this. Ina, thank you for being so brave and courageous and adventurous, and doing this for us in a linguistics conference. I think not many would do this, if I may say so. And I just imagine the reverse. That's probably empathy as well, to see, okay, what would I do in a corporate conference? Oh my gosh, I would be very nervous. So thank you very much, Michaela, Celeste. Thank you very much for your expert input. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To the audience for listening, for being here. And this was, part of the other live event today of the ICAME conference with the plenary this morning, and now the panel discussion. Tomorrow we are going to have the design thinking workshop, the beginning of that, plus 2 plenaries by Louro Brinton and Berenike Herrmann. And then it's already day 3, so time is flying, despite the fact that we don't see each other. But I think we've really tried to make the best of it. Thank you very much again to my team, really sweating behind the scenes. I know this, live streaming with YouTube, and I know there were some glitches at the beginning, so apologies for that, but I think we've covered most of the topics I had used to introduce both my wonderful lady colleagues and also the topic as such. Thank you very much. For those of us who are in the evening, have a good night. Celeste, definitely have a good night, because it's 12 o'clock already, or almost tomorrow, as you were saying. Michaela, you are in the past, you're an hour behind us, so it's really interesting. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.